G'day everyone. I tried learning Dutch and ended up becoming fluent in French. I have an odd language learning story, and if you'd like to hear it and better your English with an Australian accent at the same time, stick around. It all started about 20 years ago, not long after my wife and I got married. Now, they say marriage is all about compromise. Well, in our case, that compromise involves a lot of driving. You see, my wife grew up in Perth and I was from Adelaide. Once we got married, she moved to Adelaide to live with me, but her family was still in Perth. So naturally, a lot of trips were made back and forth to visit them. Now, if you've never driven from Adelaide to Perth, let me paint you a picture. It's 2,750 kilometres of road. That's 27 hours of driving straight through the Nullarbor plain. A place so flat and empty that even the trees have given up. No, literally, there are no trees. It's the kind of drive where you start to question your life choices about 700 kilometres in. Back then, you see, flights were ridiculously expensive. I'm talking sell a kidney expensive. So driving was our only option. At first, we'd break the trip into 2 or 3 days, stopping overnight in small towns. But as we got more experienced, or maybe just more impatient, we started doing the whole trip in one go. That's right, 27 hours in the car, each way, stopping only for fuel, driver swap, and a pee break. We ate on the go. As you can imagine, we used to arrive in a pretty state and smelling like anything but roses. Now, this was all 20 years ago. There was no Spotify, no podcasts, and barely internet across the Nullarbor. In fact, there was only one spot at the border village where you could make a phone call before you continued. Our entertainment options were therefore limited, let's say. We had MP3s burned onto CDs. Yeah, are you old enough to remember those? And we'd borrow story CD sets from the library before each trip. It actually worked well for a while, but after a few trips, even the most exciting, gripping audiobooks started to lose their charm. One trip changed all of this for me. We'd driven 27 hours to Perth, spent a week with my wife's parents, and then driven another 5 hours down from Perth to Albany. By the time we got there, I was done. I was sick of my music collection, and my wife had worn out our Dido CD. Sick of our story CDs, and honestly, sick of the sound of my own voice. I needed something new. That's when the idea hit me. Why not learn Dutch? You see, my grandparents, my opa and oma, as the Dutch name for grandpa and grandma is, were from the Netherlands. Growing up, I'd always dreamed of speaking to them in their native language. But my dad, who was born and raised here in Australia, never spoke Dutch himself. He says he understood it as a child, but was unable to pass it on to me. Still, I knew my grandparents would have been thrilled if I could speak to them in Dutch. So, in Albany, I went on a mission. I checked every shop in town that sold language learning CDs. There were only 4 of them. But I was determined. I scoured the shelves, hoping to find something, anything that would teach me Dutch. But no luck. Dutch, it seemed, was not a priority in regional Western Australia. I was disappointed, to say the least. Time was ticking, and we really needed to start the long drive back to Adelaide. Standing there in the shop, I glanced at the shelves one last time I reached out and French. A Michel Thomas language learning bundle. It could have easily been German to one side or Spanish a little to the left. Now, to be honest, my first thought was French. It's not my family's native language. I've got no particular connection to France or French. But it was there, and I was desperate. On a whim, I grabbed it, paid, and headed back to the car, with French CDs, much to my wife's surprise. As we started the drive back, I popped the first CD into the player, and that's when everything changed for me. I mean, let me tell you something about my history with languages. In school, I'd learned Indonesian in primary school and Japanese in high school, as the schools that I went to didn't teach the same languages even. My grades, let's just say they were less than impressive. The way schools taught languages felt like torture to me. Memorizing words, memorizing vocabulary, grammar drills, learning the rules. It was hard work and I hated it. But Michel Thomas, that was a completely different experience. From the moment I started listening, something in my head clicked. His method was unlike anything I'd encountered before. It felt effortless, like the language was just sticking in my brain, like I didn't have to try. On the drive back to Adelaide, I was hooked. I listened to those CDs for 27 hours straight. My method was simple. I would play, much to my wife's joy, one CD over and over again until I could answer all of the questions that Michel Thomas asked faster than the two students on the recording. His method places you like you're a third person in a classroom. Once I could do that, I'd move on to the next CD. By the time we pulled into our driveway in Adelaide, I was already on CD 4 of the beginner course set. I could form basic sentences in French already, read simple phrases and sentences, and most importantly, I was excited. For the first time in my life, I had enjoyed language learning. That excitement carried me forward. Over the next few months, I completed the entire beginner, intermediate, and advanced courses at work, while I was driving, while I was running, at the gym. I could make sentences, phrases in my head, read French texts very well, and felt like I was making progress. But then I hit a wall. While I could form these sentences in my head, speaking them out loud was slow and clunky. I could read French well, but I couldn't understand French radio or TV at all. And when it came to having conversation with a French speaker, forget it. I'd felt like I'd made so much progress, yet was stuck nowhere at the same time. I had the impression of climbing a mountain, getting to the top to see over the top, and then only realizing that there was a bigger, harder mountain to climb on the other side. How did I overcome that hurdle? Well, that's a story for another video. If you'd like to hear about it, make sure that you subscribe to this channel, like the video, and ring the little notification bell so that you know when it's uploaded. In the meantime, here's a video that YouTube recommends for you to better your English. Enjoy.